Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the farm. Today we're going to go over running electricity and doing some DIY modifications to your current electrical system you have. And we'll go over some of the stuff that we've done here on the farm without calling an electrician, doing it ourselves, and saving a ton of money. So come along with us and we'll show you a little electrical 101. So if you've been watching the channel, you know we've added a chicken coop to the side of the shop over here where Kelly's going to keep her laying hens. She loves chickens, and we're just now after over a year of being here on the place, the chicken coop's almost ready to go. So I want to go through kind of what we did, and as I go along, I'll show you how we did it and kind of give you an idea what you can do yourself to save a lot of money. So let's get started with a little bit of safety. So over here is our breaker panel for the shop. And we had this added in because we added a trailer, a 50 amp RV plug on the outside of the building for when our friends come to visit. So while that plug was being installed, I had our electrician install this sub panel to replace the old panel we had that had the screw-in fuses. So if you didn't know, if you have an old house with screw-in fuses, you can get an updated panel and bring it up to today's technology with the breakers. So starting with the breaker panel, you always want to make sure whatever you're working on is dead, has no electricity to it. So what I did is the circuit that I was working on works off of this second switch right here. I would come turn that switch off. Now, with so many different wires and circuits going around, you want to make sure it's actually off. So there's ways to do that. You can get an electrical tester like this one here. It's got these two probes. One of them actually shoves in here, so you can do this with two hands. So you probe the socket, and then you take the other loose probe and then probe the other slot in your electrical outlet. And then this will light up and vibrate if there's still juice there. Now, you want to test this. Just because it doesn't light up, go to a circuit that you know is on and make sure it works. And then that way you know there's not a malfunction of your tester. Now, you can use a multi-tool or a multimeter, but they're a little more complicated to use, and I don't recommend these for the amateur. Now, what's super easy is an electrical sensor like this. This, all it has to be is close to electricity, and it will tell you that it's hot. So, like this wire right here, that wire's hot. So I don't even have to touch the wire itself. This is just the outer part of the Romex. And it's got this little slot here. You can stick it in the slot of your outlet, and that outlet is still hot. Does not work, or you don't want to work on that. So these are very inexpensive, and I recommend these if you're an amateur person working on electrical. Use this. Also, make sure you do a test, just like I told you on the other one. Go to a circuit that is hot and make sure it signals, because these run on batteries. If the battery goes dead, it may not work. This one takes one AAA battery, or one or two. So highly recommend that. So back to what we did to get electricity to the chicken house. I have a dedicated line that I put in up here in the center that runs these outlets. So if I want to use a drill or something out here in the middle of the shop, over here by the vise or whatever, I have a power outlet up here, and I don't have to get an extension cord and go clear to the wall. Now, that power comes down and used to end right here at this box right here. So what I wanted to do, this is a 20 amp circuit. I just wanted to continue from this box down to the end of the shop and then right out the wall right here. So all we're doing is continuing that circuit, and I'll show you how we did that. So before you decide you're going to extend a circuit that you already have, there's two things you need to factor in. One of them is the length of the run. So for a 20 amp circuit that we have, they recommend that you don't go any further than 50 feet for 12 gauge wire. Now if it's a 15 amp circuit, they say you can go up to 70 feet with the 12 gauge wire. The other thing you need to consider is the amp load that you're going to have on the circuit. So say you wanted to run a 2000 watt heater out in your chicken coop. So you would take your 2000 watts and you would divide that by the amount of volts. So your normal voltage is 110. Some say 120, but I always use 110 to give me a little breathing room. So 2000 watts divided by 110 is what, that'll give you about almost 19. So that 2000 watt heater is going to be drawing 19 amps. And this is a 20 amp circuit. So we're right on the verge of maxing that out. If you had nothing else plugged in, absolutely nothing else on this circuit, you could probably pull that off without causing a lot of damage. But how often is there only one thing that you're plugging in out there in the chicken coop? Because you got other stuff running. So don't max out your system and don't overload your system. So we figured out what we're going to use out there in the chicken coop, even if we had everything running at the same time, because we don't run heat lamps because chickens don't need it. They just need shelter. They don't need heat. Even if it's 30 below, they stay fine. So we don't run heat lamps or anything like that that's dangerous out there. But we do have a brooder plate for when we have chicks. It doesn't even draw a whole amp. And then we have two 60 watt equivalent LED lights that only use about 10 watts each. And then our waterer uses, I think it was 110 watts for the water heater. It's just a little tiny heater that heats the water can to where it doesn't freeze. So adding all that up, and we're only coming in around 2 amps that we're using. So we're way under the limit. So we're okay with that. So remember that formula. Figure out what your total wattage is, divide it by your volts, which is what your system is, and then that will give you your amps. Make sure you're not overloading your circuit. So let's discuss how to extend your current circuit. So that box I showed you down on the end of the old circuit had one of these plugs in it. This is a 20 amp plug, and that's another thing you need to consider is look at your breaker in your panel. It'll have the amps right on the end of the switch. See how it says 20 amps? So we know we're dealing with a 20 amp circuit. So when you buy your hardware, make sure you buy 20 amp hardware, because they make hardware for 20 amp and 15 amp switches and plugs. So get the 20 amp stuff. So this plug, this same style plug, was up in that box on the end of the run. So you see how there's 2 silver screws and 2 copper screws, or copper looking screws, and then you got the 1 ground lug here. This is a wire from an old installation. So on the end of that run, we only had 3 wires connected to this plug. We had the white wire connected on the silver screw. We had the black wire connected on the brass screw, and then the ground wire, the bare ground wire. So to extend that circuit, say this is our box up in the rafters there, you punch out another one of these holes, and you feed your new Romex into the box, and you want to strip enough Romex to where your covering of your Romex is inside the box, but you have enough wires to get outside the box to work. And then you would shove that in. So once you've got that through the box, you would have already taken down your old plug and pulled it, unscrewed it from the box and taken it down with the wires connected to it. You would connect the new wires going into the box. You'd put the new white wire on one of these silver screws. You'd put the new black wire on one of these gold colored screws, and then you would tie in the ground wire to your wire going to your ground. Now you see there's only one ground screw on this plug. I wish they would put two on these plugs, put another one on this side so we could just connect them all up, make it a lot easier. But there's a couple different ways that you can add ground wires into your system up there. So some people would just twist two wires together and put them in here under the screw. The problem is that's really not made for two wires to be in there. So what you can do is take your two copper wires, the bare ones, and then get a little short piece of the same wire, and then those three wires, you would wire nut them together with the wire nut. Looks like this. And then you have one wire that you can take to here. So that works. So they make these wire nuts in different colors. If you're just doing two 12 gauge wires together, you could probably get by with a yellow. But if you're using a little more, you would use the red. Now these little orange ones, say you have an appliance that you're connecting up like in a light box. A lot of times those will have the braided wire, the small gauge braided wire, and you can use one of these orange ones to connect the small braided appliance wire to your Romex wires. That's what those little ones are used for. But that's all you got to do to add wires and continue on a circuit. Now they do make these plugs with single poles, but just if that's the case, just go buy one with the double poles on it. So you continue wire out of that box. Like we showed you, we ran it down and ran it out the side of the building. And then I'll show you what we did outside. Now we obviously didn't want the conduit or the Romex exposed out here in the weather. So we got a piece of rigid 3/4 conduit. We drilled a hole in the side of the shop right on the end of that run, and we ran it across. I threw a level on this conduit so I don't have water running either way. And then we drilled a corresponding hole into the chicken coop. Now I don't know if you can see that little silicone blob there on the bottom. That's just a little drip spot, so if the water was to run down the conduit, it would hit that low spot in the pipe created by that silicone, and then it would drip right here instead of running all the way to the wood siding. And then we have another one on the other side there. Even though it's very well sealed up with silicone, I still put a drip point there on the conduit. So let's go inside the chicken coop and see what that looks like. So inside the chicken coop, we added a screw connector on the end of the conduit that actually goes through one of these punch outs in the back of this box, the big 3/4 one. And then you got a nut that goes on the inside that connects the conduit to the box. And then we actually screwed the box to this cripple stud here. So it's fastened really good. So inside this junction box, I don't want to pull the cover off because it's already fastened, even though it's only temporary on there. I only use 2 screws. But all there is in this box is a connection from the wire coming from the shop to this wire that's coming out, going to our lights. Later on, there'll be another one of those little connectors. We'll punch out this bottom hole, and that will run to our plugs that we have out here. And then we will just wire nut them to the connections in that box. The connections that are already there, we'll just stuff an extra set of wires in those connections, maybe use the red wire nuts, and then that's connected. We'll run the Romex where it needs to go. So for our light circuit that we've already put in the chicken coop, there's only one wire coming out. We drilled up through the plates just in case someday we want to finish the inside in here, put siding or paneling or something on the studs here. We made sure, instead of just running the wire around the plate, which we'd have to fix later, we went ahead and did it in case we go ahead and do paneling in here. So that wire runs uninterrupted all the way to that switch box over there. I know it runs by this box up here, but it does not go into it. It bypasses that box and runs all the way over there. Now there's other ways that I want to make you aware of that power can be ran to this switch. Some people will do what's called a switch leg. They'll run the power to this box, and then they'll use the wires in this Romex that they run to the switch as power wires. So they'll take the power wire, run it down to the switch, go through the switch, and then back on one of those wires back to the light. Now that's called a switch leg, and in some areas of the country a switch leg is illegal to do by code, because even if you have this switch off, there would still be power to that box. And I may know I've done it that way, but say someday we sell the place, or the person that takes this place over when we're gone, they may not know that this is a switch leg, and they'll turn that switch off, go into that box, and it'll still be hot. So that's another reason to always check your circuits. So what we did, ran the wire uninterrupted all the way to the switch. You see there's two wires coming into this box. So the white wires we just connect together. There's two white wires. There's one from this wire, and there's one from this wire. We just wire nut those together because those don't need to be switched. It's just the common wire in the Romex. We did the same thing with the copper wire. We wire nut it together, but we added a wire to ground the switch. There's a ground lug on the switch that we'll show you. And then the only wire that goes through the switch, there's two screws on the side of the switch that, again, we'll show you here in a second. The black wire is the only one that goes through this switch, because that's the only one you're switching is the power wire. And there's the two screws. It doesn't matter which wire you put on which screw, because all you're doing is making a connection with the switch up. If it's in the proper orientation, it should say on down on the bottom. With the switch up, it is connected. With the switch down, the connection is broken. And that's another thing you want to make sure of when you put your switches in, is you make sure you have them in the right orientation to where up is on and down is off. And you can read the switch. It'll actually say off there. If it was upside down, it would say on, but it would be upside down on. So let's go in and look at that switch. So here's what your switch looks like. See the two gold colored screws? You get one black wire to one black wire to the other. And then it's either connected or disconnected. That's all it is switching that one wire. So in your box, you would have two wires coming in looking like that in the back of the box. There'd be another one right next to it. You'd use both of those holes. The white wires from each circuit, or I don't want to say circuit, but the white wires from each Romex, you would just make them a workable length, strip the end of it off, and then put wire nuts putting the two white wires together. Do the same thing with the copper wire, and then each end of the black wire you would strip long enough to wrap around each one of these screws. One black wire here, one black wire there. Now when you're putting wires onto the screws, I'll show you this one over here. Remember righty-tighty, lefty-loosey? So you want to wrap your wire around the top to the right of the screw, because the screw turns to the right to tighten. So as it tightens, it'll kind of pull that wire in. If you were to wrap it the other way, as you tighten the wire, it'll kind of want to unravel the wire. So always wrap your wire over the top to the right, no matter which screws you're doing. So like this one, you would start on this side and wrap it over the top. If you're doing this screw, you'd start on this side, wrap it over the top. Now you see these little lugs right here? There's a little lug here, lug here, lug here, lug here. You want to bring your wire all the way around to where it goes into this lug, because when your screw comes down, it keeps the wire from jumping out. If you don't go through those, around those lugs, make it short, there's a chance your wire can spit out the top right here and come loose. These get kind of tight when you're pushing them back into the box. Sometimes you got to push them in pretty hard and screw them in. Now, like for the switch that we put in, you can take the two white wires, once they're wire nutted together, twist them and then push them way back to the back of the box. Do the same thing with the copper, push them way back to the back of the box. And then your black wires, once they're connected to the switch, you just kind of put a little loop in them, so as you push the switch into the box, that loop will just continue to form and you can push the switch into the box. If you're trying to push the wire straight in as it's hitting the back of this box, it's not going to want to go in and your switch is going to kind of want to be crooked. These are fairly stiff wires and are not easy to work with. Now when you're connecting wires to these screws, I recommend that you get a little pair of needle nose pliers and bend a little hook in that wire with the needle nose. It's much easier to work with. Now some people will stick the wire in one way, wrap the wire and then pull it through, and you can kind of do that too. It takes a little practice. So you'd stick the wire, say once this is stripped, let's use this copper wire as a little for instance here. This is not where the copper wire goes, but we're just going to use it for demonstration. So you would stick the wire maybe through here like this, and then you would wrap it around the screw and then kicking it back down into this notch over here. Sometimes that works, helps you bend it around. But if you can't do that for some reason, if you can't manipulate the plug around, get you a little pair of needle nose to wrap your wires around those screws and then tighten them up. So once you get all the wires connected to your switch or your plug, it's time to install it in the box. So again, look at your orientation. That says off is up. I don't know if you can see that. So you would work this down into the box, pushing all your wires to the back, making sure there's no bare copper wires getting close to these at all. Make sure you got plenty of clearance. And then these two screws that are already in your plug, those go in these holes in the box, and you would screw that down tight. And then I always try to make sure the switch is lined up straight. You can see these screws kind of float back and forth. So if your box is straight, you can align your switch vertically. But most time, 9 times out of 10, if you nail this in new construction to a stud, it's going to be straight. So just make sure your screw's in the middle of that slot and you'll be straight up and down. And then once this is fastened in, then you would get your switch plate, take your screws or take your packaging off, of course, put your switch plate over this area of the switch, this square rectangular area here will poke through this hole and help with alignment. And the same thing with your switch cover. This area here of your plug will poke through these holes and help with alignment, keep this thing from spinning around. And this only has one screw that goes right in the middle. And then once you get those cover plates on, that box is taken care of and it's covered up. So let's talk about exposed Romex. You can see in my shop, because it's an old shop, there's exposed Romex everywhere. And it's okay. It's not going to kill anybody unless we go cut into it with something and get down to those bare wires. But you'll notice, like if you have a newer house, if you walk out into the garage, your garage will be kind of half sheetrocked and half not. Well, there's two reasons for that. Part of the reason is you need a firewall, so everywhere your garage connects to the main house, whatever walls are connected, you'll see that has sheetrock on it clear to the ceiling. And that is called a firewall. Also, anywhere there's electrical in your newer houses in the garage, there's going to be sheetrock over the wall to cover that Romex up. That's just code. That's the way they do it. So any unfinished areas of your garage generally don't have electrical running through. Now, whenever I move into a place, I always add plugs and I add switches and all kinds of stuff, because running a shop like I do just for my stuff that I do, I don't run a business, but I always need more plugs. So I'm always adding plugs, and this is another good reason I wanted to do this video, so you can add plugs and do stuff on your own without calling an electrician. Just be safe with it. So we're back out in the chicken coop. So I told you how we got to here. So now we've got our power wire, switchable power wire, going back up, all the way up, and then terminates in that box. Now on this switch, we wanted to put a light in both sections of the chicken house. This is the storage area here, and this is the roosting area here on the other side. So with that one switch, we'll turn on this light here in the brooding area and this light here in the storage area. So you can light it all up at once. So we have just a standard light fixture. Those are round boxes. Those are still nail-on boxes that you just nail right to the rafter. And we held it down the right amount in case we ever put a ceiling in here. And all the wires clear. And then we ran a wire from this box. We held them out, both out a little bit, so we had enough wire to work on. We ran another wire to that box. So that box in there only has one set of wires going to it, and we pulled them down through the box and stuck them out a little ways so we can work on them. So after you're all done and everything's buttoned up, you come back in here, you throw the switch, and if no sparks fly, you did good. If you did bad, your breaker's going to trip. That's the one good thing about breakers, is it'll show orange in here, and you've tripped your circuit, which means you've done something wrong. So if that happens, consult an electrician to see what you've done wrong, or turn this back off and recheck your work. See if you've got a power wire somehow mixed up with a ground wire somewhere or touching, because that was what would cause that to trip. So let's go over some of the tools you're going to need. You're going to need a pair of wire strippers. I've done it with a pocket knife in a pinch, but these work a lot better. So we were using 12 gauge wire. I don't know why that won't focus. Weird. Anyway, can't get that to focus. So there's numbers on these slots, and you would use the number 12 slot for 12 gauge wire, which is the second slot up there. And there's a slot for every gauge wire. And on your wire, it'll tell you what gauge it is. So there'll be writing on the outside of your wire. Let's find it on this one. Probably writing on both sides. So you see the writing there, but that's not the writing we're looking for. There's some kind of embossed writing on this side, and it says 12 AUG, or AUG 12. That means it's 12 gauge wire. So that determines which hole you use on your stripper. Now to strip your Romex back on the ends, you would use a razor knife. And this is an adjustable razor knife. You can adjust it to where the blade comes out as much as you want. So I've got it in the lowest setting, and then you come down the middle of your Romex. So if you hold your Romex flat like this, you would come with that razor blade right down the middle of your Romex, because that's where your copper bare copper ground wire is, because you don't want to cut the insulation on your white or your black wire, because that compromises the wire, and you'd have to cut the end of it off and start over, and hopefully you have the room to do that. Otherwise you're pulling a new wire. So cut down the middle, peel the cover back, and on the inside there'll be some paper wrapped around this copper wire. Pull the paper back and then cut all that stuff off. And then you use your stripper. Now, when you're connecting, like I said, it's a good idea to have a little pair of needle nose pliers. It's good to have a couple different kinds of screwdrivers. Sometimes, most of your screws will be so you can use a flat or a Phillips on them. But I use a Phillips most of the time because it's easier to line up and it doesn't slip off. But if you really want to torque a screw, you can use a flat. It holds on a lot easier than the Phillips. It doesn't jump out. And you can torque it a little bit harder with a flat. And some of your connections are going to be a smaller flat screwdriver, so it's good to have one of these around. Your ground lugs actually can be used with a flat screwdriver or a square drive adapter, because there's a square socket in the middle. So if you can get a screwdriver with that square drive, it's much easier because it doesn't drop out and it catches really good. So it works out well. Some of your clamps that go on the sides, like that junction box I showed you with the clamp that holds the wire in the side, some of those have that square drive too. Make sure you always get a tester. If you're not too experienced, I recommend that you get one of these because they're very sensitive and they'll tell you if you've got juice present. So any box you get into, before you touch any bare wires or take wire nuts off, hit it with this tester and make sure that there's no juice to it. Let's see if just my power wire right here will light up. Yep. So even on a power cord, it'll tell you that there's juice there. So nice little safety thing to have. So other than, sometimes I use drills. If you're drilling through the wood, it's good to use one with a screw on the end because it actually pulls itself through the wood. It takes a lot less effort to drill holes than just a standard spade bit. And always have a Bluetooth radio to play your favorite genre of music. Mine is oldies or the 80s. Isn't it peculiar how all the kids these days, you go to these sports events, they're all playing the 80s music because their music sucks? It's funny. So I think I've covered just about everything I need to cover for basic electrical 101. And I don't even know if I can call this 101 because we just barely scratched the surface. There's a lot more to know. But with just this little amount of knowledge I gave you today, you can save a lot of money from having an electrician come over and just do adding a plug or running a new, extending a wire or whatever, or putting in a switch and a light. So I hope you learned something today. So check out our Facebook page, and we're on Instagram also, Mark Kelly Farm. So we love you guys. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll post a link to a couple more videos up here in the corner. So take it easy.